Namo Shakyamuni Buddhaya. Dear Suong, dear brothers and sisters, and dear community, today is the 28th of January in the year 2025, which also falls on the end of the Lunar New Year of the Dragon, that year of the Dragon, and in a couple of hours we will cross the threshold of a new year of the snake. We are very fortunate at the end of this year, even though California has met a lot of natural disasters, a lot of difficulties, but the heavens and the earth still loved us, is that we also received a lot of rain and cooled down all the flames, especially the the cold air of the end of the year. It gives us a feeling of warmth, of peace, of stillness, and of joy. And this speaks of is the quality for us that we are here today, that to spend the last evening of the lunar year in Deer Park. You have the opportunity to reflect again about the thing in the life of the monastery. You see that this place, there's a cultural special thing. There's that we don't have festivities. We're not busybodied. It's very zen. Just exactly in the past when Tai was still here, that in the end of the year, that he has an evening of poetry to read poems. And it is not only when Tai was around in Plum Village, but it has been present in the 60s, and Tai still maintained. And when the Venerable at the Truklam Temple was still active at that time, there was a number of students camp students in Saigon who came to hear him listen to poetry commentaries in the end of the year. And from that generation, that whole generation has become seniors, and many of them have passed, and some of them are still alive, like but most of them are slowly leaving in the early 60s, and they were able to taste the poetry reading at the end of the year. And this tradition isn't present only when Tai was teaching and building the Sangha, but at the same time, this is an activity that is very tradition of a Buddhist tradition. In the past, in the 7th or 8th century, in China, in the Zen centers at the end of the year, the Zen masters, they all gather everyone together, and sometimes they read poetry of enlightenment, of poems of enlightenment, and sometimes they don't need to write a poem. They just need to read poets of other Zen masters that speaks to their understanding, their enlightenment, and sometimes it's not even a poem of the monastery, but it is just like poetry of very worldly poetry. But then when you look with the eyes of a Zen master, then anything will become a Zen practice, and it opens up the door for people to able to see the Dharma in each poem. So poetry in Buddhism, that they use a term, the very clear and precise term. It is the world of poems, the world of literature. And so then there is an afternoon that is very free and leisure afternoon like today. Then we just walk around, and then before I want to speak a bit a little about the realm of poetry or literature before I go into a poem. But this term is not just a term that they pick up and they use, but it is a term the language that has that intention. And sometimes we call it the world of poetry is because it is also those same words that we use every day, but they arrange it into a poem that it brings about a different kind of essence. There's a strength in it that moves our heart that is different than the everyday language. And the most specialty about this is that in poetry, they have the right to use words and terminologies that mixed up with each other that don't fall into a certain order or law. So it's like we said, colors. We can say colors as the realm of colors and sound as the realm of vibrations of sound. But in poetry, they can use poet colors and sounds and mix it all together. So then, like the haikus are also the same way. They can be completely new in the ways of what were conventional ways of using words. But in poetry, there's a deeper depth into poetry that there's some kind of language in poetry, but we do not hear it through sounds. We read it or read it by eyes, by sight. There's something behind poetry that the terms that it's like subtle language that resonates deep inside our heart, that it transcends beyond language or written words and sounds. And so then the Wikai, we call it Tika, it is like a realm of poetry. It's because within it in itself there's the harmony of emotions, of the, aspirations. And there is the present, a great presence of wisdom, of insight. And in your daily practice, that comes to that fruition of realization of your practice. That becomes a poem. And then depending on your level of understanding and in your ability to enjoy poetry, your mind, whether it comes that however, wherever you are in the breath, you can enjoy it to that level. So that it's just one poem. But in that poem, with the state of mind where you are still heavy and burdened, so you read poetry, then it is just poetry that you read that speaks about your sorrow and despair. But if in your state of mind you have a lot of practice, and you're able to read these poems and love poems, whether it seems romantic, but you're able to understand the depth of the sorrow and the pain and the joy in that. So then poetry is a space, and that not anyone, not just anyone, can step into. For example, in the terms that we use the everyday, there's many different layers. The everyday exchange about what we wear, what we eat, and that anyone can understand. But at another level, that we call it a language of art, and it needs like the sharpness of your mind in order to understand these haikus or these poems. For example, you are Vietnamese, you learn English and to speak and to do everyday language, but if you go into depth of the English literature in order to understand Shakespeare, that you might even study for 3 years and you can read it to understand the depths of his words. And this is proven through when Tai would recite the poem, never he recited a poem in English. He never read the poem. And this is natural because language goes with emotions, with your innocence, with your maturity, with it goes together with you, and it's not only alive, but it goes through many different generations of culture. And in fact, you know that children growing up in the United States, they are nurtured by the American culture, and so then what happens? And they speak naturally. They learn Vietnamese, but they can. But if they argue, they would only argue in English because they don't have enough Vietnamese language to start an argument. So then they have to say, oh, express their anger through the language, their mother tongue, which is the American language. So that is on the everyday level. But the emotions that when you are angry and your anger comes up, and that the anger has this depth that it can speak up of the emotions that you feel deep inside of you, and even your own insight. So if you just listen, when you have never, Thai has never recited a poem in English, except that when he wants to teach the deep teachings, he always use Vietnamese. And so the brothers and sisters can translate it or not translate it, it's up to them. But that is what it is. It's like the spirit of that person comes into you. It's not as simply just a language, but it is the feeling and the expression of emotion. So then they use the world of poetry, and that it is a whole world, a whole realm, immense. So there's a depth, and this depth is sometimes is it goes beyond centuries. It's not just 1 or 2 years of your own life. So then they go into this realm of poetry. It's very shaky, yeah. And there's a second thing that goes in relations to poetry that you have that you need to remember is that, dear friends, it's from the poems that you step into music and songs. It's so easy. So if you recognize these poems that are wonderful poems, and then they can curate it into music, it's not as easy, except that the writer or the art, the creator of the poem can can curate the music to it. And this is like even Thai's poems, all the Thai's poems that I dare any of the brothers and sisters can go into the music and to bring the depths of the words of his poems into life and into your practice. But all of the songs that the brothers and sisters sing are are composed by Thai, and there's a long poems that Thai has curated and composed music. But in there's greatest it goes into your own heart very easily. So that it because every single line of his poem shakes into our own heart. And there's a lot of poetry of Thai that's been composed into music, and even a lot of music that Thai has composed for us to practice. It has the essence of poetry in it. For example, what we hear the brothers and sisters sing is the song, I have arrived, I am home. Do you know that the last line of that song, the door of no birth and no death, is open? When you hear that sign, that song, you can see that in your heart. It feels light, it was immense. And then it goes on to many different levels. So then the term that they use is that the poetry is like that. So then it's the relationship that cannot be separated of the nature. Wonderful poems of nature is song. The nature of songs, of wonderful songs, is like that, the essence of poetry. And so from this point that you can see that with their everyday life, that they enjoy poetry, it is something that it seems like the requires you to have like the a sensitivity to emotions to enjoy. You can enjoy an ice cream easy, but to enjoy a good movie is easy. And then but to really enjoy poetry is not easy. So that is because that you have to be standing in front of or reading a poem is so much more difficult, because the song you can enjoy it easier than a poem. The song, they need music, they need instruments to go bring up the emotions high and low, and the colors and the essence and the scent of it. But then you need this wonderful sound of the voice that goes into the atmosphere. But poetry in itself, it doesn't have us anything else. It's just you yourself. The essence of that poem can speak to your own heart, to at least to portray the message in that poetry. And then your level of enjoying this poetry, and only then you can enjoy, because poetry is the spirit of the person who wrote it. If it's a Zen master who wrote it, it is his enlightenment of a Zen teacher that carries within it the essence of enlightenment and teaching. And so then the realm of poetry, dear community, it embraces so many levels, and we can discuss this here, but we know for sure that we cannot go outside the realm of outside the realm of poetry that brings us all together. And so I would like to read a couple of poems for you to read. There's also these kinds of poems. But if you do have never experienced that in your own life, never had this experience of enjoying these moments as such, you hear it, but your emotions are so, sort of empty. For example, the poem like the afternoon at the end of the year. I remember vaguely is that poem. If I can't find it again, but is there's a lay front he read it. He was translating a book of Zen conversation. He wrote this verse. In the afternoon in the city, everybody walks wonderfully, and in the time as frail as silk. But then my shadow and your shadow has been driven long until then. In the evening in the city, everybody's walking quickly. So then, so with the number of the Vietnamese people here, they're like after 75, 1975, then when they hear that chiều đổ thành, what it means is that there's no impression that because it's a normal term that they use. But for those who in the 70s and the 80s, when they hear these terms, they recognize immediately that is Saigon in the past. In that Đô Thành is the capital of the south of Vietnam, of their country, and they walk fast and they walk quickly. It means like in that time and space that is not as great, but then everybody's just running around and they just going around pushing and trying to. And in the afternoon, they walk around. So then in the afternoon light, the sun setting, and you can see the shadows. It also means that at the evening is almost at the end of the twilight, and the shadows on the streets are very long. So according to the sun is very frail on the on the on the on the great boulevards of Saigon. So then the long shadows fall upon the boulevard. So then either on the shadow on the boulevard, so then the shadows of each person overlaps each other. But what it means is like the busyness and the pushing and the shoving and the that falls into the city, the chasing after going home, your shadow and and my shadow in that afternoon twilight. It covers it covers on this very narrow boulevard. But if you can, within the 30 or 40 years if you are, but after 1975 until today, the term chiều đô thành is, it makes you have this like unease inside of you. But however, with those who had lived in Saigon before 1975, understands that in Saigon, that's how it was. It the life of just like pushing each other, and then you hear the shadows fall on each other and overlap on each other. When you hear this, it gives a different kind of meaning. The second part it is that you can understand is that, and it speaks of the realm of poetry, is that the shadows fall, but in front, but the your shadow and my shadow falls in the empty space. The long shadow goes back and forth. In Saigon, in the past, there's two ways. It's not one way like we are now. Here, that we cannot imagine what the roads were like in Saigon before 1975. The people in the country, long and after the war, when they hear this, they're very innocent. The pushing and shoving and the busyness of the streets and the roads going back and forth in this afternoon twilight. There's no one. There is no one in the day after working all day are not exhausted. They're exhausted in the long shadow in the afternoon. The, the leaves of the tamarind trees float across the sky. And then in the afternoon wind, afternoon breeze, the tamarind trees falling down, it just sort of fills the boulevard. And it is the image of Saigon in the past is the image of the rose boulevards full of the 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 tamarind leaves. Then when they hear they see this, you see it's sort of like my shadow and your shadow, our shadow. It, and all the shadows of everybody around us just sort of gives us this essence of that you read this one poem, you can see that poetry not only is not just a realm in itself, but it also speaks of a lot of things of a society that is present. And they don't need to research a lot. They don't need to read a song or a poem and then in about of the country at that certain time and era, and then during the war and after the war and the peace to enjoy a country and closeness. All we need to do is just to listen to the national anthem of that country. That you can also carry out the culture and the life of the person to love peace, or is that a civilization full of war? And this is something that you have enough level of to hear the national anthems of all these other countries, then you can understand this one thing. So then I want you that poetry, it is, and music is one thing. When you speak of poetry, you also speak the world of poetry, that immense world. And so this gives us the right to go into the enjoyment of poetry at many different levels and through many different capacities to nurture yourself. And when you nurture yourself in such a way that you, then your poems that you wrote will be able to manifest in itself. It is spoken. Your, it's just a bowl of rice. But for a person as a person who just eat it, it was just a person, just a bowl of rice. But as a practitioner, with the way that they eat it and mix it, the way they enjoy it is different. And these two things have become a culture that get two different characteristics of a person. It's that afternoon, the same afternoon like everyone else, but you sit with the state of mind of worry and anxiety, then it's different. But if it's the one afternoon you sit with the state of mind full of lightness and ease, then that calls it's you are a different person. So dear friends, it's like the nature of poetry is a different world in its own. So if you go and enjoy poetry, it's a different world on itself. It it needs, it requires your level of practice and your presence, and then of course the level of understanding in terms of terminology and words on the shallowest, on the most first layer, is to able to touch to touch the nature of of the nature of Mother Nature and everything else, to be able to understand it on that level. So this is the first thing that I would like to share with you, so that you can have a peek into the world of poetry. So that is just a page that is a book that has never been binded. So it's like each and every one of us, even in this time and era, in mm, this new generation, is that you can walk on like not automated cars or people, but you can't enjoy poetry. It's not a means of science. It's not a process of experiments, but it's through you on your progress, productivity of coming back home to yourself and recognizing yourself, and or have the depth of a spiritual life inside of you in order to go into the realm of poetry. So that I just wanted to share this, so that you can see poetry on a different with a different eye when we speak of these poems. So you can't do scientific research. You can't do mm, mm, decipher it with knowledge. I'm just looking at the clock to see how many minutes I've spoken already, so we can end the Dharma talk. Just 1 hour. Bear with me. The second thing that I would like to share is that I would of the thing that I would just shared with you, the the power of the Zen master is very strong. First of all, he has time. He can arrange his time, his life. He has enough intelligence to write poem. He is not busy with other things of making money or finding food, of eating. This is the first benefit of a practitioner. The second thing is that they have time. They have time to recognize their mental formations, the coming and going, of the sadness and joy and happiness, and they have the capacity to go into depth and to recognize their feelings and their emotions. So therefore, they have a lot of conditions, authority, and time to write poems. The third, their power line is great, is because in a state of practice that has there's a clear practice and there's a consistent enlightenment of the emotions of the world, of the poem of out in the world, that what we have enjoyed, but they can create poetry, and that's that with one vision, with they want the others to understand is that I'm able to recognize for examples to prove this. Yeah. In other words, I wanted to say that they are like you, but in fact, but they go into a different direction. You you enjoy it, you enjoy it outwardly as an extroverted person, but they enjoy the introverted one. They turn back to themselves into their own everyday life, and they observe their emotions, and so therefore they have the capacity to do the most wonderful things for themselves. It is to understand. It is like they are able to touch deeply, transcend beyond these feelings, and taste these poems that brings about the depth of history in themselves. And that poet who wrote that poem and how they wrote that poem, it brings the state of mind that how they observe and how they taste the suffering, and they can see clearly, observe it, and something higher and greater than that in the past is that they can compose and can add into the teaching that they want into the practice. And this is the greatest power of the Zen masters. But any low, regular grade C Zen master can't do something like this for a grade A Zen master. So that there is these two poems that I would like to share with you, that I want to remember. I want to share with you here. One poem is of Zen master Phối Đường. And this poetry that I have an opportunity that I would explain this to you. And he, this Zen master Phối Đường, the way that he wrote poems very sometimes he didn't write it. He just picked up a poem from the ancient poem, and then he make it his own poem, and he brings out the emotions of the poem. For example, when he speaks of the emotions of the Buddha, is how wonderful, the wonderful Buddha in this world that brings the teachings of enlightenment to the human people. Instead of using the terminology, of very Buddhist terminology, then you can speak of Buddhist terminology. You can speak of Buddhist terminology, but then you can emotions. You can use the language of emotion. But this poet, he did the opposite. He used poetry of uh, um, he praised the Buddha as a beautiful, as the blood flowing in the veins, the visage of the Buddha, the face of the Buddha is as beautiful of the the last empress, and then the words, last empress of China, the this beautiful. Sorry. So this as beautiful as the last empress that has just left her quarters, as beautiful as the concubine that has just stepped out of her palace. And one more thing is that they hold the fan of silk fan of many colors to cover half of the face. So then it makes you cannot recognize the face of the Buddha. And this is a person who has freedom. And so this poem, in the first of all, you can remember that it uses uh, this is a Musa Batini. She has a poem that the Zen masters that they use to use is Batini is an empress, and it shows that there's a part in her poem that says King King of Angla. It's about the poem of many coming back and forth. They use half fan to cover their face. So many times you call, many times the mirror that you manifest that show their face to see, to show their face. Yêu bản từ bà, it means that they carry the 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 guitar to cover her face. So then they hold this guitar. This is like the Chinese guitar, sitar, just to play a couple of strings. And it is nothing, but it allows the emotions, just a couple of strings that to stir the heart. And in the past, the people translated this term. It's wonderful how they translated. These are Chinese poems, so excuse me. So then when she expresses her face, they lose their heart, and they hear the sounds of her sitar, and then her heart starts to stir in the music. So I would like to read this again. We invite this beautiful person, and your heart is at an amazement, but her hands holding the sitar and covering half her face, but even the pluck of the strings that make her heart stir. And so there are some Dharma festivals in the Zen masters in the past. They don't write poetry or they don't read the sutras for, who would understand them. So then how would you understand this kind of poem? We can invite them a hundred times, a million times in order to manifest, and the cover hold the sitar and it covers their face, and you're not able to see the true face of that player. But then the most strangest thing is that they don't allow them to see the face, but as the pluck of the guitar, the sitar, it's just just a pluck of it, even though they did not play the full song, but it stirred the heart of the people who listened. And after that, there is a one person who said, a student asked at the end of the year, can you cannot read a poem of the Zen masters, of the enlightened ones? You don't read the sutras of the Sutta, but you read a poem that is very worldly poem. Is that you should think about it. Think about this poem. So dear community, so then that practitioner, that crazy practitioner, he was not there that he dared to try the Zen master. He for many years he started to understand. I get the point. He started to understand the poem. So one day that he understood what the Zen master has wanted to share, and he asked, what did I want to say? What was my intention? That you invited inviting you for, but then you come here like, but the beautiful face is very beautiful, but you have to wait by invitation 10 years in order to recognize that beautiful face that shows itself. Even if that face, I cannot see it completely, just sort of, but just the presence of that face that is manifesting, however much it is, it feels that my heart is stirred and my heart is light. And so then this speaks of that, it helps you to understand it like this. Is that in reality, in your everyday practice life, you waste so much time of you read a lot of poems, you do a lot of things, but unable to taste the Dharma. In order to have a joy in your practice, it's not as simple as it is. So then you invite it for so long, and then you feel yourself at complete lost. But then when it reveals itself, sometimes in meditation practice that you feel a lot of joy and happiness, and it shows that it feels. And sometimes that most of the time your sitting meditation is at ease, and then but there are days when your heart is at ease, and then you're also unhappy, and then you invite it all the time, and then that's what you are. So you have these ups and downs, and then there's one time it reveals itself. Your true nature reveals that, and then your practice and the joy of your practice reveals itself. But then you hold the sitar to cover your face. Then you hold something there to cover a little bit of that face, of that true nature. So the energy of enlightenment or the energy of joy and happiness is there. It's just can show itself only just a half. Instead of revealing it the full self, in order to grab onto the arahat enlightenment. But you cover yourself like the sitar, revealing its true nature. So then it's always invited like the butterfly flapping its wing, coming for you to come. So then the third line it says that then you, but even if the sitar is plucked couple strings of the sitar that you're able to taste a little bit of the joy, even though it's not there's nothing as great as the practice, but you're able to taste a little bit of that dharma, you already have that joy. So then your sadness, the despair of your everyday life follows the energy of your practice, and it goes up and down depending on your practice. Just like a person, even if it has not happened at least once, only just needs to hear a couple plucks of the sitar, just the opening of it, and that it makes you stir your heart and you feel something, and then just imagine it's like you think about this thing is that you have misunderstood me. It's that you are like I just like that you think that that's not my teaching. Mine is very simple, because I was just speaking about a lady playing the sitar, whatever you thought of as something that you created. So then this says is that the Zen master, they have a great authority to interpret it. They can speak of black and white and shadow, literate, and sometimes that can be the Dharma, and could be you can meet somebody, the Zen master, and they would just throw it and deny it all. And say, I'm just speaking about a lady playing a sitar. What are you going to do about it? So then, I just wanted to. It is like a game of the Zen masters in the past to see how enlightened you are. Yeah. And you can just not imagine. You cannot think that in poetry that there is this in the Zen schools that there's the one time I went to Magnolia Grove, and I thought this was very silly. The brothers and sisters that they built a hut for Thai in and when I asked the sisters, what is this hut's name? The sisters said that first of all, this hut when it was first built, Thai had given it the name the 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 rebellious hut, and he wrote the chữ chơi is like daring to play. And in Chinese, there's no Chinese words that says chữ chơi, that you are wrong. The, the work, the word work, it means it means uh, it means tiger's den. So the hut is named tiger's den. But then the word that he just said very simple that I will give you the hut name. This is the hut of daring to play. But then if you read here in the Chinese word text, it means the tiger's den. But then you look back and forth, but speak back and forth. But then you can discuss. But the Zen master do not believe of Zen master's words. They can speak however way because they have that right. Do not believe a Zen master. That's their right. So be careful what you hear. And this allows us to see that the level of our understanding goes up to an understanding of however the teachings of the Buddhas are just come up that speaks of heaven and hell, of Dharma, joy, or of the liberation, or Dharma, or freedom. And then when you play the guitar too, another, when you go through this story, then you can recognize one thing is that they have the authority to speak of this, but you can see a different thing. The language, everyday language, is it's almost like a little bit of Zen sarcasm for like a mother that carried a carry a lady brings a child to them. They think, oh, this daughter, I don't like this fight, but it is fine. But then, what can they say? Oh, this face is so sweet. In Vietnamese, that the ghét means, oh, this is so ugly, but it means actually very cute. So then I say this, so that I tell you a story of the Zen master's power of right, their energy, their strength when they practice. There was this monk. He is very famous as the Zen master of his time, a renowned Zen master. But there was this practitioner, he came and he touched the earth and did all the ceremony very formal towards him. And he was very joyful. And the community, he is a very this Zen student was very talented, and he was very easily accepted and embraced. And there was one time when he go in to touch the earth to the dear Thai, I really want to practice now the Dharma doors. I cannot open the doors so that I do not know how to get a hold of the practice. Please be compassionate on me and give me a Dharma door to practice. So like, oh, that's all you need to do. The temple is busy. I'm not free. I don't have time for this. At this moment, it's time in the winter. It's so cold, like ice. They need warm water to shower. The Sangha needs warm water to shower. They need warm water to wash dishes and wash their hands every morning. And this goes, it's so cold in there. And then the wood, there's not the wood. So go up, go to the mountains to get wood, to provide wood, firewood for the Sangha, to boil water. And you can learn the Dharma at any time. But then it is not it's not fish that will, it's not the Dharma is not the fish that would stink and rot and throw away. So then he went up to the forest to collect woods, and after that winter and taking care of the Sangha with the warmth throughout the whole winter, at the end of the winter he went to touch the earth to the Zen master, and he said that, dear Zen master, when I would collect the wood, then the Sangha would have warmth to practice in the winter. And then the Zen master said, what's the rush? The Dharma is there. You can see the Sangha is hungry to go down to the city to ask for rice, to go for alms for the rice. And then how can, if they're hungry, then how can you practice? So the lay practitioner went down to, and just every season is like that, other than collecting wood and asking for rice. And then after they go to go to build after that for 6 years as such, back and forth with all this busyness of the monastery. And one time the king give a declaration that the abbot there is like the national monastery by a practice center of this of the king. And then the Venerable was leaving, and I said, oh, dear Lord, you taught me for 6 years, but you didn't teach anything, and you leave me. Then the Zen master said, then follow me. So then he followed him to learn. And then they go into the temple, and then they touch the earth to the like, you taught me that I was thirsty to practice, and I did not know the path to practice in order to practice. In our church, like, I don't know the Dharma to practice. After 6 years, it's just like you go on through one door, then Thai comes in and Thai teaches you. You breathe in and breathe out, then you have a Dharma door already. In the past, it was not as simple as that. Okay, you come here, you get orientation, you learn. But then here, the Zen masters in the past, they're very stingy. They don't teach you right away. They know that you come and touch the earth and teach me the Dharma. It's not about that. And you know, one thing, you touched the earth, and he said, you promised me that after 6 years of from one temple to the new temple, please be compassionate on me and teach me something. He said, I've just arrived here, the Dharma, the three jewels, or just this, there's so many building and construction and all the guests that comes in. And so I need a secretary. Please be my secretary. 3 years of being a secretary of the Zen master. For 3 years, I thought that he didn't go up there to go up to the Zen master to ask for. Every single time he goes up there, the Zen master tells him to do something else. So then he just made peace with being a Zen master. So then after that, he went down to the kitchens to do sitting meditation. And then after he was doing sitting meditation and was deep, and there was one time, there was a cat that jumped over there and it spilled all the dishes and in the kitchen, and suddenly he realized enlightenment. And then what the Zen master was torturing him with work is that is not teaching the Dharma, but that is the way that he taught, so that that person can be go deep into the practice, to be so joyful to see his path, see us understand the path of Zen masters of the Zen masters of the time. And he quickly sat there and thought that he put on his robe to go touch the earth to the Zen master, and you have compassionately and taught me. Now I have understood. Is that, what are you talking about? I'm living everyday life. I didn't teach you anything. Quit creating ideas in your own head. So you just imagine that that's the power of the Zen master. So don't believe what he says. So you can do everything to say, tell him to do this and tell him to do that, to find that and find all of the affliction, to cut off all the afflictions and sorrow and unease and despair, and then to dwell in the Dharma of the practice, full of joy, but then tears or crying. That there's monks, but then you meet this monk, and then he was very, very crazy. Yeah. He just plays on. What are you talking about? Don't be silly. In my place, there's nothing about it called enlightenment. There's nothing for you to be enlightened about. Go away. And so from this, you can see that when you go into the practice, The gift, the greatest gift that
Món
you
quà
have
đầu
is
tiên
that
lớn nhất của chúng ta
naturally
đó là tự nhiên chúng ta
you create that your mind is
làm cái tâm
full
thức mình nó tràn
of the
đầy
first thing of the
tràn
essence
đầy
of
cái nội viên hay là
poetry
cái
in your
chất
everyday
liệu
life.
thi ca cho đời sống.
Everything becomes an art, and this happens
Cái điều
naturally
này đó là lẽ tự nhiên
because,
thôi nha.
truthfully, that you go
Vì
into
thực
your
sự chúng
practice,
ta đi vào
the
cái thực tập
enjoyment
rồi
of
thì cái
this,
chuyện hưởng thụ
the
vật
things out
chất
and the
nó
sensual
dần
desires
từ
out in
hết.
the world, it's just they are bland, and then they
Và người
lose
ta
out like the desire of
bớt đi
grasping of
ham muốn lợi
fame,
danh,
money, and
bớt đi sự
sex,
bon
and
chen,
all of that, and all of those sensual
và những
desires.
ham
When you
muốn đời
lose
sống
all
bình
of
thường
that,
nó bớt đi thì
then
các vị trẻ đang
your
dần
life will become
1/3 cái sự
two-thirds lighter.
các vị
And
không cảm
this is
thấy
what it is.
thế
This
này
is
là
what
thuận tiện,
better than in
đây là cái điều
comparison your
đây là
pride.
cái tốt
If you
nhất
don't have
mà
pride, then you don't have
trong khi nào
inferiority
các bạn
complexes. You don't have complexes.
thay vì
And
này
when you
những người
have
ngang
in these
ngao giác
inferiority
khi
complexes,
mặc
then you
cảm
have
là có
pride.
sự
You
thật,
have hurt
còn
of
hữu thắng,
pride.
còn kiêu ngạo,
And you are
còn lo
afraid,
lắng,
and you
còn
have
bất an,
better than
còn
and
thích
less
thú.
than, and these superiority,
Và
inferiority,
cái tâm
and
hành
these
này nó
mental
dính
formations
chặt đời
take
sống
hold
chúng
of you,
ta,
that
nó chi
drag
nhờ
you
buông
in your
lơi
whole life
chân
of
thì tu,
practitioners, even
tu
if
thì
you
biết
practice
tu,
for your whole life,
tâm
and
thức
you
tràn
still have
đầy
these inferiority
thấy không?
complexes.
Mặc
And when you
cảm
have
là
these
khổ,
inferiority
mà khi
complexes, you
có
have
mặc cảm là
pride.
có vui.
And if,
Vì
yeah, when
sao?
you are able to
Và
understand this,
khi
then
các vị
you
rất tự tại rồi,
release all of this,
lòng
then
bạn
your
thanh
heart will be
thang,
much lighter,
không
and
vô
you are
quý,
not afraid.
không biết sợ.
And then it means that, like, you do not
Nói
know,
theo ngôn ngữ chúng ta là không biết ngán
you don't
tay
have
nào đấy.
anything that
Họ
is
chạy rồi, không có gì
important.
quan trọng.
There's nothing
Thân nhau ư?
important.
Có gì quan trọng?
So at
Thương
the
nhau ư?
end, that
Cuối
there's one
cùng hơn
thing
hay
that
thua
we
gì
have
chúng
one
ta đều có
point,
một cái điểm đến chung.
collective point, is that this body, we would all
Không
return
ai
to
nào
dust.
trái đời
We will
cả.
all return to dust.
Việc
We
Đức
would,
Đạt nào
any
chẳng già nua
young
rụng
man
cụ.
will become a man.
Hình hài được tôi luyện, cứng chắc như đá hoa cương, rồi cũng tật bệnh ốm đau. Hoàn cảnh đẹp mấy rồi có lúc một mũi lửa nó dính vô thì tan hết sự nghiệp. Thế cho nên
It's just black
không
and
có
white.
gì
There's
thôi,
there's
chẳng gì
nothing
thua,
to be proud of, nothing
chẳng gì kiêu ngạo,
to be
chẳng gì tự
arrogant about.
hào,
You
sống một
can
cách
live
hiên ngang,
with fearlessness.
sống vô
And this
quý.
is the first thing, as the gift
Đây
that a
là điều
person
đầu
who
tiên mà
tasted the
món quà
Dharma
của
and
người
the
đến từ
practice,
Pháp thực
we're
tập
able to
họ.
touch it. The second thing that they're able to understand is
Điều
that
thứ
when
hai
they
mà quý
have
nghiệm
the
ra
way
cách
of
rất dễ
practice,
dàng khi mà
what
có
it
Pháp hành
happens,
trì
it means
là
is
biết.
that the first thing, that the
Họ
one
biết
thing
rằng
that
là
that
chuyện
the
duy
Buddha
nhất
has
con
taught
đường
is
của
that we
Thế
should
Tôn
go
dạy
into the taste the Dharma,
đi
to
vào cái
apply
chánh
it
pháp
to
luân
the
thường,
practice, to
ứng dụng
eliminate
hành
the
trì
despair,
thì đoạn trừ
sorrow,
được hầu
and
wie khổ
unease in
não
your
và
everyday
ngã
life.
dục.
And that is go
Đó là con đường
into the
đi
practice
vào
of
thiền định
the
tuệ
four
để học
establishments of mindfulness. You don't need much. Yeah, and
người
in
không
terms and the
cần
path
nhiều.
that you
Nói
practice the
theo ngôn
path,
ngữ
you have
xưa
to
thì
see
phải
the
ngộ
nature,
tạo cái
you have to
xưng
see
tánh,
your true
cái
face.
điểm
But
ngã
in
của
reality,
thực chân
that's
tánh.
so
Nhưng mà
distant.
cái điều
What
này
the
thì
one,
sao
the
bây
most
giờ?
simplest thing that you can
Hay
do is
là
to
điều giản
practice
dị
from
của
the
người
Zen,
tu tập từ cái giai
the
thiền,
practice of
nhất là thiền quán
meditation
hay
by
là
the
dài.
Tathagata. It means that what you need to
Rất
do is that you need to be calm
an
and
bình
present and relax
và
and recognize your
hơi
in and
thở.
out breath, and
Nhìn
to
hơi thở
know that
vào
that is
ra,
your in and
biết
out
được
breath.
từng hơi thở thoát ra.
Recognize your footsteps
Nhìn bước
on
chân
this
của
earth
các vị
in
phóng
freedom.
dâng trên mặt
Then you
đất,
recognize this
từng bước
coming and
chân
going
đi
of
đến
your
bước chân.
footsteps. And then
Chân
slowly,
đến
what
bước
you're
chân.
able to do, this one
Và các
thing,
vị
this
dần dần sẽ
subtle
làm
thing,
được một
is that
việc
any Zen
tinh
master
tế và
can
điều
do,
này
and
thiền
that
sư
is
nào cũng làm
that
được.
you can see your
Đó là
emotion
các
that
vị
comes
nhìn
and
cái cảm
goes
xúc
and
của mình
comes,
nó lên, nó
being born,
xuống,
and
nó
any
đến, nó đi,
emotion that
nó không
arises,
nhiều.
it's just
Cảm
an
xúc nào
emotion.
cũng là cảm xúc.
And only an emotion. There's nothing beyond that emotion. The
Không có gì
nature
ngoài
of
cảm xúc
every
cả.
emotion, every
Bản chất của
feeling,
cảm xúc nào
it
hay
comes
cảm
and it
thọ
goes.
nào nó cũng
And that
chung chung.
emotion is so deep to
Mà cảm
the
xúc đó nó
one is
sâu,
the
nó tội,
heaviest
nó
one
là cảm
is
xúc thất tình,
broken heart and despair.
thất vọng.
Those are the strongest
Cũng là cảm
emotions
xúc
that we
thôi.
feel. But it
Nó là
has the
khác
right to
cả.
come
Thì
and
nó
has
có
the right
quyền
to
tới.
go. And
Rồi
that
nó
is
có quyền
such
đi.
a sad. And it's
Và nó là như
always been
vậy.
that. It's
Chưa
not
tới giờ nó là như
because
vậy.
that you know how to
Không phải là
practice that
vì
you can
chúng ta
recognize that,
biết
because
tu rồi
in
chúng
the
ta mới
past
hiện ra.
you are a
Tại
little
vì
bit
trong quá khứ
uh,
mình hơi khổ,
crazy, that
mình đồng
you
nhất,
identify
mình là cái
yourself
cảm xúc cho
as
nên
these
tội nghiệp
emotions,
mình
but
thì
now you
thôi.
take refuge in the
Bây giờ thì
practice of the
nương
Buddha,
nhờ Pháp
that
Phật dạy
emotion
mà
is
biết rằng
only an
cảm xúc
emotion.
chỉ là cảm xúc.
Anxiety is only
Lo lắng chỉ
anxiety,
là lo
and
lắng
you're
thôi.
able to recognize your
Và
in and out
khi ta
breath
nhìn được hơi thở
through
đi vào đi
with the
ra
state of mind of
và
peace
một
and
tâm
calm,
thái
and
an vui thích lạc
recognizing the
như vậy,
practice,
bước
then
đi
you can
vô
see
thiền
the one
định
thing
rồi
that happens
thì chuyện
is
này nó xảy ra
it happens very naturally.
một cách rất tự nhiên.
Sorry. I think I was speaking too fast, and then the gods told me to slow down a bit. I'm just gonna drink a cup of tea so before I forget.
Sâu xa nó quên.
So it reminds me to slow down. Dear community, that I would like to repeat again that I like to share is
Thưa các
that
vị,
what I just shared with you is the Zen
mình vừa
master
nói
that
cho
has a
Tăng
lot of
nghe đó,
power,
thiền sư là
a
một
lot of
người có
power
quyền
in this
duy
life
trì
with
nhất đối với
your
đời
mind,
sống này, đối
with
với
their
tương
own
lai của
mind.
chúng ta.
The first power that they have is they're able to
Cái quyền uy
enjoy
đầu
this
tiên đó
life,
là họ
and
biết
sometimes
được đời sống này
deeper than you,
có khi
more than
sâu
you,
hơn ta,
and immense,
nhiều hơn ta,
greater than you in their whole
mênh mông
life.
hơn ta.
They live in this
Cả cuộc
world.
đời họ
There's
không chia
nothing
gì khác,
beyond just
không
enjoying
gì
life.
ngoài cái việc thưởng thức
Why?
đời sống cả.
Because with you
Tại
that you
sao?
worry and you have
Với
unease
ta
and
thì lo lắng
anxiety
bất
and
an, về
comparisons,
chuyện hơn thua.
superiority,
Với ta thì
jealousy
tâm
and
danh vị nhoi nhoi nó
comparatives,
làm
and then
ta
you feel
buồn,
confused with the Zen
làm
master,
ta bối
all of
rối.
those kind of things, they
Với thiền
just
sư thì tất
dissipate.
cả thứ đó tự
There's
nhiên nó
nothing
biến mất.
about jealousy. There's no need
Không
for
có cái
jealousy.
chuyện
They're not
ganh tị,
petty. And
hầm
their
và nhoi
life
nhoi.
is one thing
Và
is
đời
they
sống
it's just
họ
like
nó là
an
một
enjoyment of
cuộc
life for
vui
their
chơi
whole
ở
life. It's
nhà,
just
với thân họ
enjoying
là một
every
đời
moment
sống của sự
and
thưởng thức thôi.
enjoying their breath,
Thưởng thức hơi thở
enjoying
họ vào ra,
their health.
thưởng thức cơ
They are
thể
also
họ đang khỏe mạnh.
enjoying at the
Họ
time
cũng
when
thưởng thức
their
được
own body
lúc
is
thân
sick
thể họ nó
and
già
lying
yếu tàn
on
tật,
the bed,
nó
and they
nằm
can
trên
hear
giường bệnh, nó rên,
their
nó lắng nghe
pain,
tiếng rên của họ,
and
cũng
that
có
is
thể là
also
thưởng
an
thức luôn.
enjoyment. And this is not it's not a
Cái điều
poem that
này
I
nó
like
không
to
phải
borrow.
một
I would
loại
just
thư
like to share
ca
to cheat my
mình
way
nói
out of
để
this,
nói
but then a
rồi
person
gian cái chuyện này, chứ không.
practitioner they
Người
can
có tu
taste
tập
this.
thực sự nó làm được điều này. Hãy nhìn cuộc đời, thưa các vị, nhẹ như là phù vân thôi, không có gì nặng nề đối với họ cả. Giàu ư, cũng ngần đó việc.
It's the same kind of a beautiful.
Cũng bôn ba ngần
They're
đó
the
việc.
same kind of
Đẹp
thing
ư,
ugly. They still
cũng
have the
ngần
same
đó
thing.
việc.
They live
Xấu ư,
long.
cũng ngần đó việc. Sống dai, cũng đến chết mà thôi. Và chết sớm thì có khi là nó cũng khỏe hơn sống dai. Thế cho nên cuộc đời của một
For them,
người có
their
tu
life
tập,
is
cuộc
an
đời sống
enjoyment.
đối họ là một
The
sự thưởng thức.
second thing that comes quite naturally,
Sự
they're
việc thứ
able to
hai đến với
enjoy
họ một
the
cách tự
emotions
nhiên, đó
that
là họ
come
thưởng
in
thức
and
được những
leave.
cảm xúc
There's
lên đi của
nothing
chính họ.
serious about it,
Có
not so
gì
dramatic
đau,
about it. The sadness
nỗi
comes and
buồn
it
rồi
goes,
đến,
worry
đi,
comes and it
lo
goes,
lắng đến,
affliction comes
đi,
and goes, even
phiền não nào
despair
đến
and
cũng đi.
broken heart. Sometimes,
Thậm
if you
chí
have a
thất
little bit
vọng,
of
thất
patience,
tình,
and
thiếu
then you
sanh,
get over
kiêu
a
căng một
broken
chút,
heart.
rồi nó
You
cũng
can just
qua.
imagine in this world
Các vị
there's
yêu ngàn thế
nothing
giới này,
straight.
chưa vào phẳng bạc.
But especially if you live in
Nhất
the
là
United States.
chúng ta sống
Every
với
4
chỉ
years,
có
one
gì
person comes, another
cứ
year,
4 năm
person
một lần
comes,
đến
4 years,
rồi đi,
another person
rồi
comes.
4 năm
The
khác
economy
đến
goes
rồi
up
lại
and
đi.
down.
Kinh
So
tế
then
thế giới
sometimes it's
lên lại
prosperous and
xuống.
not. So then that's
Thành mọi
normal.
khi đó là
So
chuyện
with
bình
the
thường.
eyes of a
Thế cho nên
practitioner, they're able to
với con mắt của
enjoy
người tu thì
the
họ thưởng thức được
universe
không
of
những
the nature,
vũ
the
trụ
trees, the
thiên hà,
leaves, the dew,
cành cây
but they
lá
can
cỏ dọc
also
xương
enjoy
họ còn
themselves.
thưởng thức được
And
bản
in a
thân của họ.
deeper, and that the authority on
Ở
the
điều
right
sâu
of a
xa
Zen
và điều
master, they
quy của
have
những
the
người thiền
right
sư mình muốn nói đó là họ có
to
quyền
live normally like us, but
sống bình
they are
thường như
not
ta,
pulled away by the
nhưng
despair
không
and
bị
sadness and
cuốn vào
anger
cái
like
cuồng
you.
vui hàng
That
dập
when
giống như ta.
anger comes and sadness, you drown yourself in that. Joy comes and
Đến
you
cái
are
buồn
excited like
vui
a
tới
festival and you
ta
lose
như
it.
lễ
And then
hội,
when despair
mơ
comes, your
sầu khổ bất
face is
an trên cái
frowns
mặt
and
mày ta
has all
quỷ
these
khiếu
emotions. So that
như
as a
vậy.
practitioners, they're able to do one thing.
Người có tu tập
They are able
đó
to
là thương việc,
observe these emotions, the
quan
sadness,
sát nỗi
despair,
niềm
this
đó,
joy,
những buồn
just as
vui,
like the
những
nature
khổ
of
khổ
coming
đau
and
đó
going. They're
như
out to
bản
the
chất của
of
nó
the
đến
nature
và đi sinh là diệt, không phải
dying and
họ.
impermanence. So this happens
Điều
quite
này
natural.
rất là
And
tự
anybody
nhiên
who
thôi,
learns
ai học
about
Phật
Buddhist
cũng
teachings,
có
you
thể
understand that
nhìn
everything
được
that is
mọi
being
thứ.
observed
Mọi thứ
by
là cái
in
chỉ
you,
nhìn,
that you are
bạn
the
là cái
energy
tâm
that
giác
is
quan của họ,
observing
năng lực
these
chánh niệm năng
feelings and
nhìn.
these emotions.
Bạn
You
không
are
phải là
not
buồn, là giận,
these
là ghét,
feelings
là
and these
thương,
emotions. And
là
so then
đau
your
khổ gì
right
cả.
as a
Thế cho nên
practitioner
cái quyền
is that
uy
you
nhất
have a
của một
right
người tu
to
tập đó là
have
họ có
everything
quyền
in this life
làm
become
cho
a
mọi thứ
gift
trên
for
cuộc đời
yourself,
này
and
hết
they're able to
muốn
enjoy
hòa
this
đến
life.
họ.
And so
Họ
then
thưởng thức
you
được
that
cuộc đời
you
này.
have this life, you can
Người chúng
drown
ta
it
thì
in it,
chúng ta
like
bị cuộc đời
because of
nhầm
your
chìm,
emotions and despair,
bị buồn
and you
vui,
drown in that.
sầu khổ bất
Then you
an trong
have
thức
things
nhầm
that
chìm.
you're
Bị những thứ
being
ý thức
pulled
chúng ta nó
away and
hấp
be
dẫn,
by the emotions of
xuôi
the
đẩy,
majority, just like you
xúc
have to go
xỉn
to
ta,
this place to find
như
this
là
place,
phải đi
to
nơi
live
này,
in this
phải
kind
tìm
of
nơi
lifestyles,
nọ,
to
phải
have
sống
this
trải
and
nghiệm
to
với
have that
đời,
material thing
phải
in
có
order
món
to
nọ
have
món
peace.
kia,
In the
vân vân.
meanwhile,
Trong khi
as
đó
a Zen master, does it mean that they don't
là
have
thiền
these
sư không
thoughts
hẳn
like
dễ
you?
đàn họ,
but
phân
they're
vân ý
able to
nghĩ như chúng
smile and
ta.
to recognize
Thế
these
nhưng
thoughts
họ
that
mỉm
come
cười
and go in this
nhìn những
state
ý
of
nghĩ nó
mind
đang
and
trôi
quite
chảy trong dòng
feel
tâm
very
thức của họ
natural
một cách
and neutral
rất bình
about it.
thường.
It's just like
Như
as
nó
if they're
đang đẩy như
looking
vậy,
at a river
giống
flowing
như họ
out.
nhìn
You
dòng
see,
sông
you can
trôi
see
chảy.
this train
Mình nhìn
pulling so
những chiếc
many
xe lửa
cars
nó
and so
kéo,
many
mình
people,
nhìn
but
con
they're
chở
just
hàng
standing
ngang
still
ngang
on
qua,
this
còn họ
planet and
đang
watching this
yên
train
như một
pass.
đất
And
rừng
so then the
ngang
third
qua.
thing that I would like to share with
Thế
you
cho
is
nên
that
cái điều thứ ba
the
chúng ta nói với nhau
when
nghe đó
these
là
when you are able
khi
to
các
taste the
vị
Dharma of practice, then
đến
what you
những
can
vị
do
chánh pháp tu
become a
tập
person, the
thì các
richest
vị
person
trở
in
thành
this
những người
world.
vô
Your
cùng
life
có những nhân
will
gian.
be completely different
Đời
than
sống
others.
chúng
You
ta
carry the
không bị
same body, the same
vẫn
everything
mang
else, but you have a right.
bình thường. Thế nhưng mà ta có
You have a
quyền
right to enjoy your life different than
thưởng thức
just
đời sống
people
chúng
who
ta
don't
khác với
practice, who
người
don't
đời.
have
Người
this
đời thì
depth of
mang trong thân
spirituality.
con người,
And
đôi
sometimes
khi
they
họ
have
đắc chí,
complexes, the
đôi khi họ
superiority,
mặc
but
cảm,
with the Zen
đôi khi họ
master,
kiêu ngạo. Thế nhưng với vị sư thì
everything
không.
is a condition.
Mọi món
So
đều
this
là sự
body
tiện
is a
dụng.
condition.
Hình hài
And
này
the sadness
là
and
sự
this
tiện dụng.
joy and this emotion is also
Cảm
a
xúc buồn
gift
vui này
for your
nó
life
cũng là một
in
món
this life.
quà cho
That
tiện dụng
these
như cuộc
thoughts,
đời phù phiếm.
these calculations,
Nghĩ
they
suy
use
này,
it as a
công thức
condition,
này
as a
họ vận dụng nó
possessions that they
như
have,
một
but
món
that they
sở
don't
hữu
see it as
có chứ không hề
their
không
own
có
possession.
cho
So
họ.
this is the one thing, that last
Đây là
important thing
cái
that I would like to
điều
share with
quan
you,
trọng
so that
cuối
you
mà
can
muốn gợi
recognize
dắt
that
đại chúng với
in
các
our
vị chúng
everyday
ta nhiều
life,
rằng
if you
trong
are
đời sống
fortunate enough to be able to touch the
nếu may
Dharma,
mắn chúng ta tiếp xúc
you
với
really
Phật
have a
pháp
Dharma of practice, and you have a
có được pháp hành
practice,
trì,
concrete
có được
practice.
quy
The
y pháp
first
hành
thing that
trì thì
happens is that in your own life
điều đầu tiên
becomes
nó xảy
more
ra là đời
poetic,
sống của chúng ta tự nhiên nó
more
tươi sáng hơn,
flavorful, because you
peaceful hơn.
have the capacity
Tại vì
to
mình có khả năng
exhibit
cũng làm được mọi thứ
the
nó
lifestyle
bằng
of a
cái tâm thái
poet,
của nhà thơ.
more than that you are able to
Thơ luôn tâm
exhibit
thái nhà
with your
thơ là
state
không
of
thể nào
mind of
bằng
a
được
Zen master.
bằng tâm
And
thái
therefore,
của các
in
vị
your
thiền sư.
own self, in the end,
Và cuối
living
cùng
in
thưa đại
this
chúng
world,
rằng là
50
sống
years,
trên
70
thế gian
years,
này
there
50
is
năm,
not
70 năm
where you're
hơn
more
nhau
what
không
you
phải ở cái
have
chỗ
to leave
mà ta
behind,
có
but
gì
what you have,
để
like
lại cho
you
người.
are able to
Hơn
do
nữa
that
ở
for
chỗ là ta
yourself.
làm
Your legacy
điều
is what
đó
you
cho
can do
chính
for yourself
ta
in your own
trong
state of mind
tâm thức
to realize that enlightenment.
thành đạt
And that is
giác
the
ngộ
most
thì là
important
chúng
thing.
ta
It's not what
mới là những
you
phước
have,
quan
money
trọng
or
không
fame
phải là những chuyện
or
có
fame
lời của
or
văn pháp mà
money
nương
that
danh thì
makes you an
còn gì
important
quan trọng
person,
đối
but
với
it's
một tu
something that
giả.
you can apply for yourself. These are the
Đây
few
là
things at the
vài điều
end of the year, this afternoon at
cần
the end of
sự
the
chú
year,
tâm,
in this moment of freedom
có
and
chút
joy
thanh thản
and reflection. I
để
share with
lắng
you
nghe
to, so that you can reflect
những
in
điều
the poetic
các
life that
thiên
we
nữ
should have
của
in
chúng ta
our everyday life
phải có
and in this
dưới cuộc
world.
đời này.
So this is something
Đây là
absolutely necessary as a
tất nhiên
practitioner.
những
That
người
as
tu
a
sĩ,
practitioner, especially
nếu người
monastics,
tu chúng
if
ta,
your life
nhất là người
is
xuất gia
still
và đời sống đau
in
khổ
just like
vẫn
fighting and
còn
struggling
bon
with this
chen
unease, and you're not
và
living
chúng
strong
ta
and living
không
free,
có sống hùng, sống mạnh,
living
hiên ngang,
fearlessness and with
sống vô úy,
poetry, with
sống
poem,
khí ca,
then you're on the wrong path. You're not
sai.
studying the Buddha's path.
Không có một
In truth, it is like you shouldn't. That is, you have to
chính xác
live
mà nói
strong,
thì tu phải
live free,
sống hùng,
live
sống mạnh,
without fear,
sống hiên
live
ngang,
with poem,
sống vô úy,
poetry. That is the
sống khí ca.
essence. Needs to have the essence of
Và chất đời
poetry.
sống của họ phải
So,
thiêng
in
liêng.
order to enjoy a cup of
Họ có
tea,
thể
to
thưởng thức một
enjoy
buổi
an
trăng,
afternoon of
thưởng thức
stillness,
một
to
buổi
watch
chiều
the
yên vắng,
evening of the
thưởng
last
thức một ngày
Lunar New
cuối
Year,
năm
is
yên bình,
enjoy the sitting
thưởng
meditation
thức
when you're sitting
lúc
with your
cõi
friends.
thiền, thưởng thức lúc
And
đầu chỉ
in
vận
the
động
meanwhile,
vô,
when you enjoy,
và thậm
when
chí
your body is sick and
thưởng
in
thức lúc
pain,
thân thể mình nó
you're
mệt
able
mỏi,
to smile to
đau
that
nhức,
pain and that
cũng
ache.
cười về cái
And
đau
there's
cái nhức của
moments
thân.
when
Và
you
thưởng
are
thức những lúc
full of impermanence around you,
đầy
and
những
your loved ones are
vô thường
dying,
bất
your
trắc
friends
xung
are
quanh, người
leaving,
thân ta chết,
and these
bạn bè ta
misfortunes
ra
of
đi,
your life comes in,
hoặc
but
những
your
bất
heart
hạnh đời sống
full of
khổ và đau,
confusion and
nó làm
fear.
cho lòng ta
It is
đầy
also
dẫy
an
những cảm giác
opportunity to
cũng
enjoy
là
the
cái cơ
emotions that
hội để ta thưởng
arise.
thức những cảm xúc đang lên
And
đang
in
xuống,
truth,
đang đến đang
that
đi.
is a real practitioner.
Chính
You need to
thức
have at
là tu
least
tập
that.
phải như vậy.
Done. Finished. It's 5:20. You guys are hungry.
5:20 rồi, còn gì nữa?
Thank you, Sangha.